Good evening, everyone. A warm welcome to the IMIS SFB lecture tonight. It's a super pleasure for me to welcome Frans Lelie and Maurice Crul for tonight for several reasons. I mean, we have been introduced to each other more than 30 years ago and have been friends since the time, but there's also a long-term friendship and collegial working relationship between the two of you and IMIS, which started in the early 2000s, I think, or mid-2000s, when we did the TICE project, a big European project on the second generation, integration of the second generation. At that time, with Michael Bommes and Maren Wilmes here at IMIS, our main interlocutors. And I think, well, you've also served for 4 years as a director of IMISCO, which is, of course, also a very close connection, let's say, or working environment. We've been together from 2014 to 18, I think. So Maurice was part of the team that did a great job in opening up IMISCO also beyond European borders and more institutes. So the follow-up project that we did together was Pathways to Success. So not only the second generation, and that ended up in a joint book publication that probably some of you saw, the New Social Mobility, Second Generation Pioneers in Europe, so which we edited together with Andreas Pott here. So, and the two of you, just to come to the topic, let's say, what we are talking about. So Frans and Maurice were the ones who kind of brought the Vertevax term of superdiversity to the Netherlands, let's say, and also, and then with the last project, of which we hear more today, that did this one step that, funnily enough, migration studies finds it very hard to do, but which, when you take superdiversity or other concepts like migration society or majority-minority, cities, neighborhoods, if you look at that more closely, is actually pretty close at hand, namely to look at those without a migration background in the areas where superdiversity is happening. So this is tonight's topic. The visit is also very timely because we've just had the book coming out, which also gave the title to this lecture, Society of Minorities, Gesellschaft der Minderheiten, Living in Superdiversity. It has just also been published in the Netherlands in a Dutch version. And so this came out in September. It was published by Beck, CH Beck, so that's quite a prestigious publishing house. So we hope that you will gain a lot of attention for the book, and we are happy to hear your talk and get your results and so on. So just for the completeness, I mean, you saw it probably also in the invitation. They are both working at the Institute of Sociology at the Free University of Amsterdam. Maurice as a professor and Frans as research fellow and project manager. So I would say the floor is yours.
So thank you, Jens, for inviting us, and it's always a pleasure to come to Osnabrück, especially because, as Jens was saying, we have a lot of friends here, and it's always nice to meet up again with friends and discuss the latest issues around our big field that expanding so crazily in the last decades, migration studies. I mean, our forefathers, those who served on our thesis committees, they were, I think, in Europe with 15 people. And I think IMISCO PhD student network is about 1,000 people now or something. So in these 30 years, a lot has happened. So today, indeed, we're going to talk about majority-minority cities and also especially the people without migration background. But the narrative I want to get across is that living and working in diversity will be the most important competence of the 21st century. And that we indeed have published a bit of advertisement in 2 books now. One was more addressing the academic world, the Neue Minderheit, And C.H. Beck published this book, Gesellschaft der Minderheiten. And it was an interesting journey for an academic, because we were approached by the editor because they saw interviews with us in Die Zeit and Die Welt. And he said, yeah, I want to make a popular book with you. And said, well, I think we already sort of published a popular book on this topic. And then he said, no, you didn't. So we really tried to make a book for a broader audience. And I think that is also very important, because it's high on the political agenda. And a lot of the academic work we do does come into the more mainstream media and discussions. So actually on Thursday we probably have an interview with Der Spiegel in Hamburg, and that sort of interviews and this book, we hope to influence the narrative that is now around migration and diversity in our cities. So, as a start, the world is changing very fast, and many of our European cities are becoming majority-minority cities. And I give the example of our hometown, where now in Amsterdam, 60% of the population has a migration background. And this is the definition that you are either yourself born abroad or one of your parents is born abroad. It's still very different compared to the bigger picture for nationwide. But also, if you go a bit further in the future, in 2050, already 1 in 3 people in the Netherlands will have a migration background. So it's not only a phenomenon anymore in the big cities. And migration-related diversity will be the new norm in the future, especially in the cities. If you look under the age of 15 in Amsterdam, it's sort of look into the future. If you look at this age category, 2 out of 3 children have a migration background in Amsterdam. So, and this is not only to say these are white Dutch kids that are without migration background, because the third generation, when your grandparents maybe have come from Suriname, are not counted anymore in this group of migration background if you are born in the Netherlands and both your parents are born in the Netherlands, but only your grandfathers. So this diversity is even bigger than you see in the figures now in terms of ethnic and racial differences. Jens also gave me slides where you see this phenomena also in smaller cities. Here in Germany, you see a lot of the cities that also have become majority-minority cities, or at least if you again look at the younger population under the age of 18, you see similar figures as in Amsterdam, where 60, 70, 80% of the young people have a migration background. So it's a phenomenon across Europe. And what does that mean for people in majority-minority settings? What does it mean for how we live together? What does it mean for how we work together? And which new competence do we need to be able to live and work together given this new reality? And how does ethnic diversity, and that's more the positive thinking then, become an added value to people when living and working together? So basically, and that's also what we do in the book, we give sort of 3 visions on ethnic diversity. There's sort of the anti-diversity thinking of right-wing populist party, actually wishing to go back in time when there was a more ethnic homogeneous society. It's sort of backward thinking, that's what we call it. And then there's the old integration thinking, where integration is mainly conceived as integrating into the majority group. And that still is, in the Netherlands, but also I think in Germany, the dominant framework for the present. And today we want to bring a new idea into the picture, integration into diversity. And I think also looking at these demographics, this will be more the perspective of the future. Why a new vision? Humans, of course, have always migrated since the beginning of times, and because of available transportation means and globalization, migration will continue and increase at a faster pace. And even the most right-wing governments, also our own government in the period that is now past us, where the party of the PVV of Wilders was in power, we saw actually that migration during this government period increased compared to the period before. So this was the party that was saying, we're closing the borders, we will stop asylum seekers, and actually migration increased in that period. But even if it would be possible to close the borders, like Trump is now trying to do, you could say, ethnic diversity will also increase because of births and now very common mixed marriages. So in the end, our European cities especially will become increasingly diverse into the future. So more and more European cities will be minority cities. Most big cities are already majority-minority or are at the brink of becoming majority-minority cities. And we need, especially for this new reality, a new future scenario. So, just very briefly, but I think all of you know this very well, the old integration thinking, integration into the majority group is seen as a unilateral process focused solely on people with migration background, whereby people without a migration background are more or less the norm group. They are the sort of passive receiving group. They don't need to do a lot. They are sort of the people that are receiving guests, as you can say, and have to show them how things are done in society. But from them, nothing is really expected. Now, in this new theoretical framework, integration into diversity theory, integration is a bilateral process whereby diversity is the new norm. And in integration into diversity, we do not focus on one group, the people with a migration background. We focus on all groups and how they are successful in becoming a part of this new diverse reality. So we also wrote a more theoretical article about this idea, also comparing it with the assimilation theories before in a special issue of GEMS a few years ago. So if you're interested, you can look it up. It's online and open access. So the story I'm telling is basically coming from a big project we did, an ERC Advanced project, where we looked at people without migration background in majority-minority neighborhoods in 6 European cities. Cities that were either already majority-minority cities or were starting to become a majority-minority city. It looks like Vienna and Hamburg are a bit behind the curve, but that also has to do with the definition based on nationality. If you would look at the same people in terms of birth country and birth country of the parents, they are actually also very close to the other cities and become a majority-minority cities. The design of the project, very briefly, you can ask me later, was a survey that we did in all the majority-minority neighborhoods in these 6 cities, and we did qualitative interviews in one of the majority-minority neighborhoods. And we did BAM online experiments. More than 400 respondents in each city, in total 3,000. I already told you the definition we used. The age group 24 to 45 years old, because we thought this group, especially living in these neighborhoods, has to make important decisions, where to live. They're starting to raise families, whether they want their children to grow up. So we thought it was an interesting group to see what choices they would make, given that they're living in these majority-minority cities. Sample was coming from municipal population registers where possible, And in Germany and Australia, we also made use of onomastic sampling, name recognition, and screening. So we developed the integration diversity theory by looking at both diversity attitudes of people and diversity practices of people. So what are their ideas about living in diversity neighborhoods, but also what is their daily practice in these neighborhoods. And we assess these positions by using an ID matrix. On the horizontal axis, there's the diversity attitudes, and on the vertical axis, there's the diversity practices. And based on the outcomes, we can assess the ID climate of a neighborhood or city. Still looks a bit abstract, but I will give you some of the numbers in the following slides. These were the questions that we used for the matrix. Would you say that country's culture is generally undermined or enriched by people coming to live here from other countries? And diversity practice, largest circle of friends. How many of the people in your group of friends and acquaintances have a migration background? So this is how it more or less looked. And we say basically those who are really fully integrated into diversity belong to the group 3. They at least have half of their friends and acquaintances have a migration background, similar to the neighborhood where they live. And they see diversity as enriching. And the group 7 are the people who are sort of with their back against the diversity in their neighborhoods. They self-segregate into their own ethnic group, and they see diversity as threatening. So if you look at the data from Amsterdam as an example, we saw a big divide between people without migration background with higher education diplomas and those who don't have a higher education diploma. Here we see people without a higher education diploma. We see that a lot of them see migration diversity as threatening, and that's also very commonly reported in the literature. But we saw also an interesting group, 20% who see migration as enriching, and where half of their friends have a migration background or their acquaintances have a migration background. So a big group that would say is integrated into diversity quite fully. When we look at the people with a higher education background, we see actually that a lot of them are self-segregating in these neighborhoods which have a majority-minority composition. They are very more often saying that migration is enriching, more like the lower educated, but fewer are actually having contact with people with a migration background. And this is something the literature often doesn't report about. The main focus is on people who are lower educated. But actually people who are doing the real work in these neighborhoods are more often lower educated. So we concluded that many people without a migration live in highly diverse neighborhoods. They shop at the Turkish corner store, get their takeaway at the Surinamese place, but many do not have a mixed friendship group. This is actually a picture in our own neighborhood, which has a food festival. And it's interesting, it has a majority-minority composition in our neighborhood. 2/3 of our young children have a migration background, but somehow these white Dutch people find places where they can come together without people with migration background. Interesting enough, in their social behavior, they are even segregating there. So that also places our sort of thinking about integration on a very different level. If you look both at the people with and without migration background, then people without migration background are no longer dispensated from the process of integration. They also need to become part of this diverse context. And they often lag behind because they have less experience with functioning in a diverse context. A lot of the children of immigrants, they have grown up in very diverse neighborhoods. They've gone to school that are very diverse. And of course, because of their family history already and their migration, they have learned to do diversity from a young age onwards. A lot of people without migration background do not have that experience and therefore lag behind. So that's why we are saying adapting to life in a super diverse context might be the biggest psychological transformation of our times. Not so much for people with a migration background, but especially for people without a migration background. Why, you could ask, is this important? Why would you need to be integrated into a super diverse context? Why can you just not self-segregate? Well, maybe give the example of work and career opportunities. You need, for instance, in the future, if you see these demographics, to be able to lead an ethnically and racially diverse team. And if you have never experienced this in your young life, which you can also do in the Netherlands, there's families even that live in these majority-minority neighborhoods, they bring their child to the childcare, into a commercial childcare where there's only other white Dutch kids. They go sent in primary school to these special education schools which have progressive learning pedagogies which are very segregated, where there's hardly any migrant children. They send their children later on to gymnasium, again very segregated. And when they come to our university, where half of the students have a migration background, they cannot adapt to that situation because they're not used to it. And this, of course, can also translate to the labor market. If you are not used to this environment, you need to be adapting to it. Also, if you're not a leadership position, you in the future have to work with colleagues with a migration background. You have to understand to sell your services or product to a diverse clientele and audience. And a lot of people, of course, also work abroad. I think 1 in 3 of our students in the end goes abroad to work there, and then you work for international firms. So in the end, it's a very important competence. And fun is also important. I mean, if you don't feel really belonging to a team, you will not have the fun and the humor and understand the jokes in the team. So it's important for all of us. So at the same time, we saw that a lot of people without migration background have not learned to function in a super diverse context. And as I've shown, only living in a majority-minority neighborhood does not bring people automatically to meet people with other different backgrounds. So it doesn't happen by itself. But we found in our more qualitative interviews, but also in our survey, that integration into diversity is something people can learn to do. How can we learn to do diversity? So we found out that many people feel a sort of belonging uncertainty when they find themselves in super diverse environment. This concept of belonging uncertainty actually comes from the States, where it's used for Black Americans that have to function in white environments and they feel belonging uncertainty, but we sort of turned it around and we found it more applicable in this case for people without migration background. They could not really understand the rules of engagement, they were afraid to make mistakes, and this is a part that really resonated when we held talks everywhere in the Netherlands, where a lot of people without migration background said, yes, that's actually what I'm feeling when I'm in a diverse context and I don't really know how to interact with people. And as a consequence, as we saw, a lot of people avoid contact and do not initiate interactions with people from other ethnic backgrounds. So how to overcome belonging uncertainty? We do not only want to signal the problem, but we also want to help the people to overcome it. So we found that contact has to be organized and based on a common goal. And this is coming more from the survey outcomes. People, for instance, participating in leisure activities with people with other backgrounds have a more mixed circle of friends. It's very simple, actually. It's not really rocket science what we are saying. I mean, if you belong to a soccer club, like in our neighborhood, it will be very mixed, and you will meet people with a migration background. In the soccer club, there's no belonging uncertainty because it's clear why you're there. You're supposed to play soccer together and to win. And over time, you see that people become friends. You see that people who choose to send their children to a mixed school have a more mixed circle of friends. Again, very simple. A lot of your friends, especially in primary school, and if you have young kids, are the parents of other kids in that school. If these kids have a migration background, the parents also have a migration background, and over time you become friends. And also people working with colleagues of different ethnic backgrounds in a team have a more mixed circle of friends. And this is especially also important where you see the people who have not higher educational credentials. They are often working in their teams with people with a migration background. So our conclusion was mixing doesn't happen spontaneously. And this is also a bit of critique on the progressive idea that diversity should be a celebration and then things will happen by itself. But we found out actually they don't happen by itself. They need to be organized. And there's something to gain. We found that people who are integrated into super diverse surroundings, they live and work there, are happier. They feel more connected, they feel more safe in their neighborhood, they report more friendly access with people from other ethnic backgrounds, they are better able to work together and better able to solve problems together. And it's again very simple. Connection is better for us than avoiding and conflict. In this whole discussion, I think you have the same here in Germany. There's a lot of talk about loss in this debate. And especially loss for the people without migration background. But we say the most important divide is not between people with and without migration background in this discussion. The winners of the futures are people who are integrated in diversity, and the losers will be the people who reject diversity. And this is the same for people with and without migration background. So that is the real divide, and not the divide in terms of migration background. And then again, we saw also in our project, it's in people's self-interest to be winners. Because there's something to win. And why would you not be part of the winners instead of the losers? So that is an important narrative. So, to conclude, the competence of living and working in diversity is the most important competence of this century. And this requires stepping out of your comfort zone, where everything feels familiar and safe, and where you probably consider yourself to be in a norm group. Thank you.